Hi there, I'm Duncan Young. I'm the Head of Workplace Health and Wellbeing at Lend-Lease here based in Sydney. Sorry I can't be with you here today. If you're watching this, that means I haven't been able to get across the ditch to see you all in person, but I hope you're having an amazing conference. And there's always so much to learn with these kind of get-togethers. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about health and wellbeing and what it means for you and the performance of your teams. So health and wellbeing actually isn't a new concept. You only need to think about 1946. We've got the World Health Organization starting up. But health is a state of complete physical, mental and social wellbeing, not merely the absence of disease. And for many of us, we get that a little bit confused. So we use health and wellbeing together, but health is really the management of chronic disease, being less sick, if you like, versus wellbeing is the kind of stuff that you're being the best version of yourself or actually thriving in life. So they're slightly different. Wellbeing being this journey that we're always aiming to head forward on every day. Now, the good news is that your health and wellbeing is modifiable. In fact, until the age of 80, about 80% of the chronic disease, etc., is related to the lifestyle actions we do every day. After about 80, our genetics start kicking in and that the genes start influencing your health and wellbeing. But up to that point, and for most of us in the room today, you're probably under 80. So you can literally influence your health and wellbeing through small intentional change every day. And that's what we're actually going to talk about. So let's get started when we're talking about lifestyle. Now, we've all had a tricky year. Optimism is in a bit of need at the moment, I've got to say. We've still got a pandemic rolling around the world. Every country is slightly different. Definitely Australia and New Zealand have suffered far less than the UK, the US and others. But we often talk about being positive, but in these kind of uncertain times with the economic uncertainty and all these other pandemic uncertainty, I think we need to introduce more the word of optimism. And optimism is believing that good things will happen in the future, regardless of what's happening today. So it's a slightly different thing about being positive. Being positive can just be ignoring everything that's going on around you. But really, optimism acknowledges what's happening right now and allows you to move forward, knowing that good things will happen in the future. For most of us, there's a gap between where we are today and where we want to be. We call that the WellBeing Gap. And this is Cantrell's Hope Ladder is a classic example of this. So they ask a question. This is the basis for the Gallup and also the World Happiness Report. They ask you, out of a score of 0 to 10, 10 being the best possible life you can live, where are you today? Anything over 7 suggests a thriving well-being. And obviously countries that are war-torn or in the middle of a pandemic would score much lower. But the second question is, in the future, 3 months from now, where would you like to be? So what are you aiming for, that well-being gap? And for most of us, we're aiming for something a bit higher. So I'm a 7 most days, but I'm always aiming for about an 8.5 in the Cantrell's Hope Ladder score. But if you want to bridge your wellbeing gap, there are really only a couple of options that are affording us. The first one we're going to talk about today is the epiphany. You've woken up in hospital, you just had a heart attack and you say, I'm not going to drink nor smoke again. But the problem with epiphanies as a change tool is they're notoriously unreliable, they're hard to predict, and the results may be catastrophic. So let's take the epiphany out and put to one side. The other way of changing your well-being or increasing your well-being is actually changing your environment. So, of course, there are 3 types of environment. There's your physical environment. That's the things that surround you every day. There's your social environment. So they're the kind of peers or company that you keep every day, and they really can influence your health and well-being. And of course, there's a virtual environment. So when you turn your phone on, are you surrounded by the type of apps that allow you to learn, the kind of podcasts that allow you to progress in life, or are you faced with Facebook, Instagram, and other things that take us down that rabbit hole of life? So that's the environment, and you can change your well-being by changing your environment. Of course, the last one is the easiest one to do, and it's called making change tiny. So this is a theory by both B.J. Fogg, who's written a book called Tiny Habits, and also James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits. So they all work on that successful change happens in a very, very tiny way. So we're going to talk about that today. Now, if you haven't been stressed in the last year, then you're probably in the minority, but stress is a natural response to stimuli. So in the old days when the lion used to roar behind you, those who are a bit on edge ran a bit quicker than those. The ones that weren't so fussed about the lion actually got eaten. So over the long term, stress has actually helped us arrive at where we are today. We've survived because of stress, which is an interesting concept in itself. But what we're finding is being stressed about stress is causing a lot of issues. They call that chronic stress. That leads to burnout. We know that burnout's now being put on as a disease under the WHO. So it's actually listed as a disease these days. So we've got to be careful that we're not stressing ourselves too much or being stressed about stress. And of course, that we're looking after our own health and well-being in the basic sense of the word. Now, the circle of control is one way to think about your stress and your everyday activities. So I learned this a long time ago in the early 90s. I did a Dale Carnegie course, and they talk about the circle of control every day. And on the outer ring, there are things that we should be concerned about, but we can't do much about. My example would be over the Christmas period, I was due to travel to Tasmania to go hiking. I should be concerned about whether those borders would be remain open and whether I'd be able to travel. But there's really not a lot I can do to influence a pandemic. So I should be concerned about it, but really I shouldn't spend a lot of cognitive effort worrying about it. Obviously, the next ring is about influence. So again, I'm not in full control, but I can influence it. That means I booked my accommodation that was refundable. I made sure I had the right insurances in case I travel. All those kind of things. So I couldn't control it, but I could influence it. So I spent a little bit of time on it, but not too much. The ring in the middle is the most important one. That's called control, my attitude, effort, and my actions. So knowing I was going hiking down in Tasmania, I continued to stay fit, have all my stuff ready, make sure that when the opportunity came, I was able to take full advantage of it. The story's not lost on me because the week before Christmas, I live on the northern beaches in Sydney. We went into a lockdown bubble and I was unable to travel to Tasmania. So that is a very apt description of actually how you can think about your stress. I could have spent all this time worried about whether I could go or not, but what I was able to do is break it down into its smaller parts. So I only put the amount of stress to it that I actually needed. We also need to think about with our health and well-being what habits and routines are. So a habit is a automated action. About 40% of all of our actions every day are actually habits. So we don't even think about it. Think about how you get up in the morning. You wake up, you go to the loo, you wash your hands, you brush your teeth. For me, I walk the greyhounds and I go for a swim. The beginning of that sequence is totally automated. I don't wake up and think, oh, I wonder what I'll do today. I might change things up. I always just go to the loo, wash my hands, brush my teeth, and then get on with my day. But the routine takes often more effort. So I swim every morning in Sydney. It can be quite cold in winter, not NZ cold, but Sydney cold. It's about 14 degrees in the water. You're swimming in the dark. So if you've got a fear of sharks, that too plays on your mind. So what I do is I use habits to get me to the beach every morning. So I make sure that I get up, go to the loo, wash my hands, walk the greyhound, and then I actually go to swimming. But it'll never be automatic that I actually wake up and end up straight in the ocean. It's the same with writing. If you want to be a good writer, what you want to do is get up, go to the loo, wash your hands, get a cup of tea to sit at your desk so you can get on with the deep kind of cognitive effortful work that it takes. So that's a slight difference between the two, using your habits to get to the healthy type of routines or things you want to achieve. In my case, it's swimming. In your case, it might be writing a daily blog or daily reflection. Things that take effort are often not automatic, but we can make it easier for ourselves. Now, most of us give up. in advance of seeing any change. And when we talk about marginal gains, this is where it comes into effect. So because change isn't linear, it happens incrementally over time, we often don't see this change. To put it into a mathematical sense, if you were to get 1% better every day for a year, you'd be 37 times better at the end of the year. It's incredible to think those tiny aggregation of marginal gains have made a huge impact over the course of the year. But for so many of us, we give up before we actually see that change starting to happen. It's all happening under the surface. So that's the main thing we've got to appreciate here. This was made famous by David Brailsford. He's a director of Team Sky. He's been in the news a bit more than you'd probably like. He's a bit controversial. But he looked at the tiny things you could do to obviously improve the cycling team, Team Sky, and they went on to win multiple gold medals in the 2012 Olympics, but also Team Sky was a real force to reckon with in the cycling world because they focused on the small things that matter over time. Most commonly asked question that I get by people, and I talk to a lot of people, is what's the latest thing in health and wellbeing? Give me the secret sauce, Duncan. But the reality is there's nothing new in wellbeing. It's doing the same things, but doing the same things well. The 4 pillars that we want to focus on for you to be the best version of yourself are physical exercise, nutrition, social connection, and of course, recovery. Now, you'll never have all of them humming along perfectly, and that's why wellbeing is a journey. But I want you to think about those 4 pillars and how you might have those in your everyday. There could be actually a 5th pillar if we want to take it out that's about purpose, it's about mastery, it might be spirit in the either religious sense or non-religious sense. But for today, let's just focus on these 4 as a way to move forward. Recovery is probably the most important thing that you can focus on. No one wins a gold medal by sleeping less. No one stands on the dice and says, oh my God, I did so well, just won a gold medal, and I put it all down to a lack of sleep. We know that we all need 7 to 9 hours sleep a night. And for most of us, we're not getting that. We're seeing a sleep deprivation epidemic essentially around the world currently. Countries like Japan only get about 6 hours, 21 minutes sleep per night. It's the same with the US and the UK. It's sudden about 7 hours. But we know that you will have physical impairment with anything under about 7 hours. If we were to look at the standard 8 hours sleep, which is easy just to do the maths on, I'll tell you why the 8 hours is a good rule of thumb. The first 4 hours of your sleep cycle is about physical recovery. It allows you to wake up, hunt down your lunch, and it allows you to literally get on with your day physically. The second 4 hours is about mental recovery. As you sleep, you lay down memories. You actually do most of your learning when you're asleep. So taking all the stuff you've learned during the day in the short-term memory is put into long-term memory. We also know that during the day, beta amyloid plaques build up in your brain. They're now thought to be have a causal effect with both Alzheimer's and other mental health diseases, and they get washed away in that second 4 hours. So the fluid flows through your brain in the second 4 hours and washes away some of those beta amyloid plaques. So, for example, if you only got 6 hours sleep tomorrow night, you get your first 4 hours of recovery, but you're literally cutting your mental recovery in half. We know that people who are underslept also have a negative outlook on life. They see the world as a glass half full, and they're often not nice to be around. So if you want to be better at what you do, have more energy, be a better learner, have a better working memory, I think sleep is the main one to go. Now, of course, you've all met those CEO types who talk about getting 4 to 5 hours sleep a night. They may have a gene defect. It's called the DEC2 gene defect. It's very rare, so it's about the same rareness of being struck by lightning, which is not very common. But so for most of us, we need to focus on that 7 to 9. If you want a simple test tomorrow, if you wanted to wake up at a certain time and if your alarm didn't go off and you slept through that time, I literally suggest you're underslept. And of course, you've probably all participated recently in one of the largest world sleep surveys. It's called daylight savings. We know when the clocks change and you get 1 hour less sleep per night, there's a corresponding 24% increase in heart attacks. We know there's 30 extra fatal fatalities on US roads, and also federal judges, when they hand down their sentencing, is more severe on that day. The good news is when the clocks change back and you actually get an extra hour's sleep, we see a corresponding 21% decrease in heart attacks the following day. That's how sensitive we are to getting a good night's sleep. And of course, movement, where physically, we use physical movement for many things. One of them is to improve our cardiovascular fitness. So even if you don't care about being fit or not, your cardiovascular fitness is used by your brain. Remember, your brain needs blood. If you've got a better circulatory system, then you're going to be better to be able to function as well. But we all need that 30 minutes of moderate physical activity every day. We want to raise our heart rate to a certain rate, but you don't need to be like me. I swim every morning for half an hour, but it turns out the research at Charles Perkins Centre here at Sydney University, you can break down your 30 minutes of moderate physical activity into as little as 30-second bursts during the day. So even if you've missed the morning swim, the morning run, you weren't able to cycle to work, when you're at work, you can still get a fair amount of exercise. Their studies showed that over a 6-week period, just by taking 3 flights of stairs 3 times a day, so that's 60 steps 3 times a day, during the week for a 6-week period, they saw a 5% increase in cardiovascular health by doing nothing else but those staircases. We need to build a bit of discomfort into our everyday. So next time you go to the shops, you're going to park right down in the far corner. You're actually going to walk all the way into the store. You're going to carry your heavy bags back. We need to start stressing our body a little, if you know what I mean. The type of walking you should be looking at is called brisk walking. That's the kind of walking you do when you're running late for a meeting. You can still actually talk to people, but you're a little bit out of breath, a bit like as I'm talking to you today. So we want to make sure that we're building that movement into our everyday. For those who are still not convinced, walking can actually make you smarter. We know that you have a 60% increase in divergent thinking outcomes when you go walking. That's from a Stanford study that was done many years ago. They put one group of very clever kids in a room. They said, how many ideas can you come up with for this piece of paper or this object? The ones in the room came up with X, and the ones that went walking for 20 minutes ended up producing 60% more divergent thinking outcomes than the others. So just that walk is really important. Now, unfortunately, in Australia, there are virtually no animals left in the pounds. We've had, with working from home, everyone's gone to adopt a dog. But we know that people who own dogs walk about 200 minutes more per week than non-dog owners. So again, there are multiple ways to actually engineer movement into your life, either that's work or having a dog at home or whatever. These simple things like active commuting to work can make an enormous difference, both to you physically and psychologically as well, to help you be a better person. Now, I'm probably preaching the converted here, but we're just going to go right from the beginning. You are what you eat. In fact, there's new research that says you feel what you eat. And this is a researcher, Felice Jacka. She took 67 clinically depressed patients. She put half of them on the modified Mediterranean diet. She put the other half on what's called social support. They get to see a psychologist every day. They do cognitive behaviour therapy. As it turns out, the group on the modified Mediterranean diet, so that's leafy green vegetables, nuts, pulses, fresh fruits, all those kind of things, ended up reducing their depressive markers to the point that some of them were able to come off medication altogether. So I'm just going to state that again. Fibre-rich traditional diets lower the incidence of mental health, in particular anxiety and depression, and that's been proven by the Food and Mood Institute. Felice Jacka is the lead professor there. When we look around the world and we look at those on traditional diets, there is a lower impact of mental health incidence. So that's the Norwegians, that's the Mediterraneans, and of course, the Japanese. So you don't have to eat like a monk. This doesn't need to be your lunch every day, but I'd like you to start thinking about adding a few extra things. Fibre is a key ingredient for our emotional and our physical well-being. We're going to talk a bit about our gut biome in a minute. But who would have thought that nutrition was such a powerful force in helping people be the best version of themselves? The absolute killer to end of this, if you were to take those patients who are traditionally on the Western diet, that's the diet that we have today, it costs about $134 a week to feed yourself. Now, if you were to go the modified Mediterranean diet, it costs $112 a week. So you're saving $20 every week, and you're going to be much healthier and have a better outlook on life. So I think nutrition is probably the most under-researched and underappreciated tool in our arsenal for being better, but I'd like you to consider that as a strategy going forward. Now, there are no two jokes or anything today, but your gut biome plays a really important part in how your body reacts and how mentally well you are. Your gut-brain axis connects your stomach with your brain. It's called the vagal nerve, and lots of messaging travels up and down through there. It's non-verbal, so it doesn't actually speak to you, but it sends you feelings. And all of you would have in the past said, my gut feel tells me. And that's because the gut's telling you stuff. It's just non-verbal, but it sends a whole bunch of signals up and down this vagal nerve to your brain. So it's very interesting. Now, serotonin, the happiness hormone, 90% of the happiness hormone serotonin is generated from your gut biome. So that's the large amount of bacteria that sit in your gut that basically churn up your food and actually help send these good feelings and messages around you. So we now know that there's a lot of correlation between poor gut health and, certain disease like obesity, and now they're looking at mental health disease at the same time. So we've got to start learning to feed our gut biome. So you can either go down the modified Mediterranean route, which means, instead of having that muffin at morning tea, we're having a handful of nuts, or we're having some yogurt or some fresh fruit. All these things contain fibre and soluble fibre. The fibre passes through your upper intestine and then moves into the lower intestine, where the gut biome can actually go to work and feed on that kind of stuff. If you eat highly processed food, it never gets to your gut biome because it's absorbed by the small intestine up the top. Simple things I do, for example, so I have a smoothie every morning. I have my kale in my smoothie. No, I don't. No one has kale in their smoothie. But we can make sure that we're adding some fibre into our smoothies every morning. So I choose green bananas instead of the really ripe yellow ones. Really ripe ones full of sugar, nice and yellow. The green ones are full of soluble fibre. In fact, you can buy green banana flour currently, which actually adds a lot of fibre. Obviously, we're putting in the flax seeds. We're putting in all the nuts and things like that. So again, you don't need to change your diet. You're just adding a bit more roughage. Even if you're an elite athlete, which I'm sure many of you are in the room, even if you're eating your pasta, which we know is high in carbohydrates, high in energy, if you cook your pasta, let it cool and cook it again, it becomes high in resistant starch. So again, even if you didn't change your diet and just change what you ate, then that will make a difference. So that counts for rice, baked potatoes, and of course, pasta. Now, at the last conference I had, someone asked me if I was to triple fry my French fries, would that count as being high in resistant starch? I've got to tell you that is not the way to go. But thinking about the food and how you prep it is. Now, of course, the last pillar, which is obvious but is lost in our society a bit, is around social connection. We're hardwired to socially connect. And obviously the last year has been tricky because we've been physically isolated, but we haven't been socially isolated. And it has exposed a whole bunch of things to us that just because you have 1,000 friends on Facebook doesn't mean you've actually got a lot of meaningful connections. And that's what we've got to start looking at. It's not how many friends you have, it's the quality of the relationship, how meaningful those relationships are. Dr. Vivek Singh, who's the Surgeon General in the US, wrote a whole thing about loneliness in the US. They're finally finding increasingly that when patients are at end of life, the doctor would say, is there anyone we can ring for you? Is there anyone messages you'd like to pass on? a lot of people literally didn't have anyone to communicate with. And it led him to thinking about loneliness and social isolation. Now, why social isolation and loneliness are important? Obviously, it's a physical thing, but it's also a health thing as well. We know that the equivalent, if you're lonely, it's the equivalent of smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. And so, as you all know, smoking is not good for you, so that's bad news. If you're lonely or socially isolated, it increases the risk of premature mortality by about 26%. This, again, is the research that's happening around the world at the moment. There's a lot of stuff happening in the UK. There's actually a minister for loneliness in the UK currently. They say about 1 in 10 people are categorised as lonely. In the UK, that adds up to about 8 million people, so it's a really big issue. People who are lonely and not socially connected don't get to participate fully in life also. Not only do they have poorer health outcomes, but of course they're not participating at work as you'd like. We know that the secret to being successful at work in the future is our ability to form and maintain teams. So if you look at the World Economic Forum data about the kind of skills we need in the future, one of them is the ability to form and maintain teams. This is, again, reinforced by Linda Grattan's work, who wrote The 100-Year Life. And this is a really important thing that we need to take on board. Tacit knowledge is the kind of knowledge that's shared person to person. It's not the stuff you read about in a book. It's the kind of knowledge that's spread person to person. If you have poor social connections or you are lonely or socially isolated, you don't get to participate in this spread of knowledge. So I want you to think about how you might reach out to someone else. Many of us don't reach out to a stranger because they think the stranger is going to find you a bit boring. It might be the case, but it's a rarity. But most strangers go, wow, someone just reached out to me. So it's really important that we make the effort for our weak connections. They're the people when you're standing in the latte line, you don't know the person, but you see them most days and you just start a conversation with them. Nice and gentle. It doesn't need to be a full D&M. Just reaching out to them. They might not have spoken to anyone that day, and yet you will feel a greater connection with your community and they will benefit too. Social connection can be turned around so quickly, and it just takes one person to ask a nice open question like, how are you doing? Or tell me about yourself. Nice open questions, really easy to do. So I encourage you at the conference, you can practice this. Walk up to someone you don't know and you can practice your opening line. Nice, safe environment to try this kind of stuff. It's really important. I want to sort of, in the last quarter, I've given you a lot of information, some of it doom and gloom, but I want you to start thinking about how you set up your systems. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, has a great quote to say, the trajectory of your life bends in the direction of your habits. Remember, 40% of all of your daily actions are your habits. So if you've got them sorted, then obviously you're going to be well ahead of the pack. But how do you make that a reality? Many of us don't find habit change a reality. It turns out that it's not duration that forms a new habit, it's actually frequency. So it's how many times you do something versus for how long you do it for. For many of us, by the third week in February, all those New Year's Eve resolutions have failed, largely because we've over-optimised them. We've said, I want to do a big change in my life, and the reality is you can only change small things at certain amounts of time. We know to embed a habit takes anywhere from 3 weeks to about 45 weeks to embed even moderate changes. So don't overcomplicate your aim. So for me, if I was thinking on New Year's Eve, I want to be a better swimmer. What do I do? What kind of kit do I need? Where do I need to go? Who do I need to swim with? What stroke do I need to do? You don't need to worry about all that. To be a better swimmer, you've just got to turn up every day. So I turn up every morning at 6:30. I swim with the same group. It's become a regular habit or a regular routine, I should say. And over time, I've become a better swimmer just because I turn up. Whereas if I spent too much time optimising, I probably wouldn't even get around to turning up because I'd be too worried about what I'm going to wear, where I'm going to swim, what stroke I'm going to do. Often it's the simplest thing. So start small, embed that, and off you go. Angela Duckworth, who's famous also for her book called Grit, that's the theory that hard work outplays natural talent, talks about how you embed an action over time. She says it's very hard to plan and execute on the same day. So what I need you to do is to think, one thing I'm going to do better tomorrow. So one action you're going to take on, you're going to plan it today to execute tomorrow. Again, my swimming example is, in order for me to swim at 6:30, the day before, I make sure my wetsuit's out, my bag is by the door, I make sure everything's optimized so I know where my keys are, everything's laid out to make sure that I can get to swimming. I don't wake up and go, oh, I wonder how I'll improve my cardiovascular fitness. Maybe I'll swim today. It's really the planning the day before that allows us to execute tomorrow. I know there are probably a whole bunch of cyclists in the room, and I can almost guarantee you that cyclists, the night before they have their bike out, they have their helmet, and invariably they will put their gloves in the helmet because you can never find your gloves when you're in a hurry. So everything's laid out the night before so you can meet your little peloton at 6 o'clock in the morning stress-free because everything's laid out and ready to go. It's the same for everything you want to change. You need to do some planning today to execute that tomorrow. The best way to start shaping your habits is to shape what's called your home court. So the places where you spend most of your time, if you look at this diagram here, here's a person who's living an amazingly clean life. Everything's laid out perfectly, but that's the way he likes to work. And that makes a big difference. If you want to drink less booze during the week, you've got to make sure that there's no booze in the cupboard in the kitchen. If you want to start eating better, you need to make sure there are no chocolate sultanas in the fridge, but when you go to the fridge, there's chia pudding or there's stewed fruit or there's healthy snacks that you can go to. Shaping your environment. If you want to be a better reader, then you need to surround yourself with books. Like my whole desk is full of books and quotes that I can easily pick up and start going with. So shaping your environment makes an enormous difference when it comes to embedding your habits in the long term. The other way to do it is to think about your new identity. So I'm the kind of person who takes the stairs as part of my physical routine. So I try not to take the lifts. Unfortunately, I work on level 17 in Barangaroo, so I'm forced to take the lifts. But I try and do all the interconnecting staircases if I need to connect with people during the day. It's the kind of identity base where you just start looking at yourself through a different lens. And it means then you do a whole bunch of different things. You might not associate with a certain type of old friends that you used to. It might be that you start having a regular exercise program, whatever it is, but identifying where you want to be, because every action you make is a vote for the kind of person you want to be. And that's a really nice, simple saying, again, by James Clear, Atomic Habits. Now, it's no use thinking, oh, I'm going to do all these things unless you track them. Jerry Seinfeld is famous. He's a very clever comedian, but he wasn't always so. And what he does is he writes one joke every day of the year. He doesn't wake up and go, I'm going to write today's best joke. He says, I'm going to write one joke. And then his whole aim in life is never to break the chain. So he writes one joke every day, and he has for 10 or 15 years or 20 years, he has built up a system of collecting jokes, literally 300 or 400 of them every year. We need to be able to reflect on whether we're being successful in what we're doing. So that's why you need some kind of habit tracker. It's a really simple example. If you mark on a calendar, whatever your goal is, whether that's to walk outside, to lift weights, or to even do radical things like journal before bed or read a book before you go to bed, just mark them in a diary, and then at the end of the month you can see whether that's working or not. The action loop means that we need to be able to see the action. We then need to assess whether it's working, we need to adjust it, and we need to reset. You would never run a business by saying on the 29th of June, we're just going to check the finances, see whether we're on track. Of course, every month you're going through your finances and your cash flow. So why wouldn't you do it in your everyday life? You need to write stuff down. You need to reflect whether they're working or not. Of course, this is the last slide that we've got going on here, and it's really about how you can build more well-being into your everyday. We call it the Build Your Ideal Day Wheel. We've run this program with about 2,000 people globally, and it's about asking people what are the small things they can do to live their ideal life tomorrow. And that's largely around a routine. It's about getting the right amount of sleep, some physical activity, having lunch away from your desk. These are the small things that add up to a really big difference over time. And you might think, oh, what difference does eating lunch away from my desk make? Well, it means you're actually chewing your food for a start. But Australian Heart Foundation also show you to have a heart age 1 year or older if you eat lunch at your desk versus eating lunch away from your desk. These are small things, but when small things add up, they make a big difference over time. Remember again, 1% change made every day for an entire year, you'd be 37 times better. So that's fantastic. The wellbeing journey for your business could look like that. I always talk in these basic terms. You're going to build awareness, get people excited, give them all the information. We're going to foster that curiosity. We use that using heart rate variability monitoring, but you could use it in terms of surveys or anything to get people to buy in. And then, of course, you need a habit change program or some coaching to make sure that we embed that long-term habit change. Remember the action loop, the learning loop, the action, the assessment, the adjustment. It's actually easier than it looks, and I know you're all living busy lives, but start small and continue on. And remember, of course, practice gently. People who are kind to themselves and then work on their strengths versus their weakness are far more likely to be successful in the long term than those who do not. So again, enjoy the rest of your conference. I think I was the last speaker, so please enjoy some social connection after this. Say good day to a stranger and a wee connection, and hopefully 1 year I'll get to see you in NZ. Bye for now.
Now, Duncan is just going to join us very briefly before we finish the conference. Hi, Duncan. Thank you for your presentation. We've got the top question here for you from our attendees. What health and wellbeing initiatives have you found to be most successful in terms of participation by occupiers at Lend-Lease assets?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you everyone for listening through that long talk. It's sad I couldn't be with you today. But look, to be honest, it doesn't matter what you start with, but obviously everyone likes physical movement. It's very obvious to see from an occupier or a landlord point of view, setting up good end-of-trip facilities, setting up, bicycle user groups and bike buddy systems, encouraging people to do walking meetings. So it's a management thing. Actually teaching people that walking meetings actually help you creative or divergent thinking outcomes. So it's both mapping out the path you could walk plus actually teaching people why you might use a walking meeting. It's obviously no good for finance. Creative accountants get in trouble. So we use it for more creative thinking type stuff. So the physical stuff is really important, but increasingly we're seeing the mental side of things coming in as well. So we're seeing more and more in-house yoga, more and more in-house training around resilience and that kind of mental strength type stuff. So everyone, as I say, every real estate building is slightly different, but just focusing either on the physical movement, the mental health, and or nutrition if you want as well.
Thank you, Duncan. I know this is a quick chat, but for the wellbeing of everybody, I'm going to be getting them off their backsides very shortly. So thank you for your time this evening. Duncan Young from Lend-Lease.